Thank you so much. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here with Commander White and Carin, and looking forward to diving into everyone's favorite topic of data and AI. So I'm just going to jump right into it. So when we talk about transformative AI for decision-making in government, what does transformative realistically mean today? Better speed, better insight, better outcomes, better trust, et cetera?
Yeah, so I think there's a long lineage in transformation, right? There's the way we approach technology is probably a little ad hoc sometimes, right? We say, oh, we need to replace this system. We need to build this new capability. And so about 3 years ago when I started this journey as the Cloud and Data Branch Chief, it was the first time the Coast Guard actually made that a focal point, right? It was an actual organizational change that we did. We said, hey, we're going to build a structure here of a team that is 100% focused on getting us into this future state. And so what our view on transformation is radical change, right? It's radically transforming how we approach problem sets. So when I planned this out, I created a vision for how we would be interacting with this new environment in the future. That vision had three main principles: speed, resilience, and value. And I put some underlying criteria on that for us. And every year we would pulse check our movement through that transformation. And so now today, we have over 25 workloads in production in our cloud environment. I just finished a whole bunch of programmatic reviews for them, and we have a lot of satisfied customers, right? So that's 3 years of work, 25 workloads in the cloud. That's an incredible amount of opportunity for us and excellence. But beyond that, we've also created a lot of foundational technologies that are paramount to this talk in particular. So we've built a data fabric, which we call Surveyor. That was under the guidance of our Chief Data Officer and our Office of Data and Analytics. We also created a software factory DevSecOps pipeline capability. We've added 3 low-code environments to our repertoire, and we're building capability off of those environments. And all of those form this, what I call like an integrated platform experience, right? So we're taking all of these capabilities, putting mission applications on top of them. The underlying data is shared between those applications. And then we can build analytics and AI and API and every other experience we want off of that shared experience. So that's the level of transformation that we've done in 3 years. It's not a one-for-one replacement.
Yeah, and for me, transformation, it's, previously on speaking engagements talking about AIs, we're like, we're not there yet, we're not there yet. And it's exciting because this is the first year I can really say like we've seen the transformation, and we're really starting to use AI to make those informed decisions. And so for me, it's really about changing from using data and being reactive and looking at it after the fact, but really using it in an automated way, getting faster decisions, more informed decisions, things that maybe we would have missed by looking at it without AI. So we're using it right now with our HSI, with our work employment, and we've seen it grow and make tremendous success by taking what an auditor would look at from a form that was handwritten, pulling that data in, giving reliance and reliability on the data, but then also highlighting where there are some nuances that saying, hey, you should look at this. And what it's done is, one, decrease the workload and the backlog that was almost going to be like impossible to get through, but then also just taking that time for the officers and agents to do other stuff. So it's been really transformative, and there's tons of use cases that we've had, but it's really about getting more mission value and outcomes, having more informed decisions, having more quality of those decisions being made.
That's great, yeah, and taking a data-centric and foundational approach really makes a lot of sense, making sure you have that foundational layer in place to build on top of. And if you think about the history of AI, this really came into play in 2023 is when OpenAI released ChatGPT for the first time. So it's really new technology. Of course, we've had predictive AI since it really got big around the 2010s. So we've seen it continuously grow, but it's still a relatively new technology. So it's amazing to hear about that transformation. So when it comes to governance, ethics, and guardrails, how do you operationalize the principle of human in the loop, given both your missions? And in real-world systems, how does it go beyond being just a policy statement?
Yeah, so governance can be a four-letter word in some places, right? But I think it's really important to establish that up front. right? You want to establish the norms, the rules of behavior, how you really want to interact with this technology, especially if it's new. So it's very important that we do that in a very open and collaborative way. And that goes from when I'm all the way down in the trenches here in the technology layer, right, the infrastructure layer. Normally, you don't talk about governance there, right? That's usually governance is applied to you. But what I did was a very active, like, let's reverse that approach, right? We're building something new. Let me bring the people from headquarters down into where we're operating an engineering service, essentially, and saying, how do you want us to represent your governance? Right? We want to build that right into the framework that we're having, not bolted on, not put a layer on top, but it's infused into that experience. And there was a couple trends that happened during this, right? So there was a zero trust movement. We have a goal of 2027 to be zero trust compliant, right? So that was a piece of governance that is really technical in nature, but it actually transcends into governance on data security and interoperability. And then you also have the AI revolution, which happened, right? Oh, guess what? Now you have to deal with AI. And that is a very evolving situation, right? So every single year, we basically have to look at our governance rules and basically scratch them out and rewrite them again in order to keep pace with how the commercial industry is moving and simultaneously how fast the government is moving, right? So we've been starting with, I would say, unauthorized AI applications. They became unauthorized, and now we're replacing them with very much authorized systems, right? A great example of that is the introduction of GenAI.mil. And it's an interesting philosophical question. So if some other entity deploys a capability like that, can you just immediately start using it? What's the ATO rules on that? What is the ability for us to share these experiences between components? Because typical deployment has been, I'm deploying it for myself, right? I'm building a Coast Guard service, or I'm building an Army service, or whatever that is. But now we're building these transcendent services that are going across all manner of lines. And I really like what's happening is that that's being attached with the rules of behavior and saying, I want you to use this. This is a safe place. I don't want you to put your stuff in the unsafe place. Right, so I think we're having this great trade-off between capability and governance that's happening right now, and we're on board with that train. So we released a bunch of rules of behavior, ways of interacting with AI, the authorized services. We've been the Coast Guard has been on the forefront of doing that. So our Chief Data and AI Officer has been keeping pace with that movement, which is really exciting. On the other side of the coin, when you talk about data governance, which I think Carin's going to talk a lot about that, we build the infrastructure for data governance, right? I always say to our customers, I don't really care what your data is. It's ones and zeros to me, right? It could be completely encrypted. It really doesn't matter to me. But what I want is to make sure the rules of ingest and egress in my system are in place and comply with your requirements. Because at the end of the day, you're responsible for your data, right? There's a data steward, data owner. And I'll let Carin continue that one.
Yeah, and as far as the human in the loop, like, it can't be an afterthought, right? It's got to be built into process because I know for other things, we have so much work on our plates. Life is so busy right now. It's so easy to like get comfortable and rubber stamp and just approve. So you have to take the human element and build it into your workflows, your automation. You have to identify critical decision points that a human must make those decisions. And for me, it's training. It's telling what are the limits of AI and what are the capabilities of AI so people understand that. But also at the same time, making the decision maker know that at the end of the day, they are accountable. And AI isn't here to replace us. It's not here to replace those decision makings, but it's here to help make those decisions more informed and easier for us to make. So it's really about the human judgment aspect and making sure that people know that they're accountable for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you both hit on a key point of integrating those guardrails and controls into that foundational layer, into the security layer, embedding it into the architecture as you're building out the solution. It shouldn't be an afterthought or something you bolt on later. It's something you incorporate into the architecture of the workload you're developing. So that makes a lot of sense.
I'd also like to tease out a little thing. Data sharing is a real big concern, right? And we share data all the time with our DHS components. We also share data with DOW. The Coast Guard is kind of this like sharing nexus, right? We have all the data, we want to give it or take it or whatever and combine it. So when you cross those organizational boundaries, now all of a sudden you're crossing governance lines, you're crossing schema lines, right, at the real technical level. There's a we have to really set norms and standards about what exactly do you want to do with that data, because how I present it to you, how I give it to you is quite important in that, right? The context of which that data is going to be used should be understood up front. But do you want to share?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think like that's where having your governance, knowing what data we have in inventory, having, we're through this whole thing right now with DHS. There's a lot of data sharing going on with Coast Guard and even outside of DHS. And so it's like ensuring we have governance, that we know our inventory, making sure that we have quality data, it's real time, authoritative sources, but also understanding like having the infrastructure and the environment and the data platform to be able to share. So that's something actually we're working on this year, and one of our biggest priorities of our CIO and also of DHS CIO is to create that environment and that data architecture that we're able to share more easily. That we have the platform for a data fabric, data mesh. We have, data products, so we don't just have the raw data, but we have data products that are clean and consumable and ready to be used. That is one of our highest priorities and our key aspect to make sure the data gets out there.
Yeah, and that's been something that we've seen emerge as a really key priority in 2026. I saw a stat in 2025 where it was basically 78% of organizations are using AI in some way, shape, or form, but only 5% are actually seeing value out of those use cases. And one of the big reasons for that was cited, there's a multitude of reasons around individuals using it, being difficult to measure that type of value, but really biggest was the data and actually being able to make use of the data in a governed, controlled, and efficient and auditable way.
Yeah, I would agree with that because there is a lot of data quality challenges. And like two of the use cases that are like just off the head when I mentioned the I-9, another one is looking at the resumes. That's new data coming in, right? Resumes is new data. We have the old data like, hey, this is the minimum requirements, but it's new data. It's coming in and we're taking it as it is. I think as we get to data that we already have and like linking those together, it will be a little bit more challenging because we are running up and seeing that data quality issues.
And that's the journey we went down for the last 6 months, right? We have transitioned our business intelligence tool from a legacy system to our modern data fabric. We finished phase 1, we're on to phase 2 right now. And the number one challenge for that is representing the data. Because you have basically what you have is these legacy pipelines that may have been built at some point. They're baked, right? They're just sort of somewhat static, probably. So you're going from this static system where you're taking source data from known applications, you're doing a transformation, you're putting it in a data warehouse, and then you're scavenging that information out of the data warehouse. The data, as it is represented across that entire chain, is very, very different. And so by the time you're doing analytics or measures or metrics or anything off of that information, you don't really know what happened beforehand. And so what I say is, when I'm selling the data fabric and the data mesh concept is transparency, 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 right? It's all about representing exactly what happens, controlling that, owning it, right? Making it visible, and ascribing an owner to that. Because what we don't want in the future is static data pipelines. We don't want that, right? Data changes all the time, the use of that data changes all the time, and you need to be able to be dynamic with it. And I often I compare data pipeline work to software development work, right? We really should be thinking of it like that, right? Data teams are actually software development teams. They're writing Python code, they're doing SQL, they're using AI all the time, right? So I've used AI in those data pipelines to help smooth data for delivery, right? As I'm in the fight, right? I am helping this journey out, and that is a turn that I want to see in policy as well. It's like treat data as a dynamic asset, and by doing that, you treat it as a deliverable, like a product, an actual product, not just the end result, but everything that goes into making it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about it, we're developing microservices that have AI components to them. So why would we not treat that in the same way that we're developing applications? I know I'm deviating here from our question.
It's my fault. Sorry.
But anyway, yeah. So going back to a bit of the human judgment and accountability. In a high-stakes environment, how do you ensure AI strengthens human judgment rather than narrowing it? And how can leaders clarify that trusting AI does not mean automating ethics and compliance?
Yeah, I think it's hard, but I think that like another example like that we use is the HR. We have resumes coming in. Tons, and we're hiring like crazy, and it's a huge process, but we realized there was an AI aspect of it. You have your minimum quals, let's look at the resumes and let's use it. Where I think the human judgment, where AI helps that is, it could flag those. It says, hey, this doesn't match, this doesn't meet the minimum quals, but it's transparent with the reason. Like, because of this, found on this, and citing exactly why it made those decisions, and then having the human come in and review that and make the best judgment. Okay, was this right? Did they make the right indication or the right flag for us, or is this wrong? And it's important for two reasons. Is one, you're accountable for that decision at the end of the day being made, but also it's important for you to look at that to understand, hey, do I need to refine our training model? Is there something that we missed that we could do better? I mean, it's always going to be improving more and more as new things, new experiences, new degrees come out, things like that. It's like, hey, was this a minimum qual? Did it meet it? And so refining that and making sure you're constantly adjusting and learning, I think, is key. And then you're building trust. I mean, I do think full trust of AI is going to take time, but I think as we're deploying and as we're seeing the response, the growth, the confidence rates, when we were doing the I-9, it started out as like 89% confidence of like what it was reading. And then we, tweaked it. We got up to 97%, and we did it at a small pilot site, and we did a lot of auditing and reviews over that. And then we realized, hey, like this is giving a lot of mission value. We're seeing that input. It's being reliable. It's being truthful. Let's go ahead now and go nationwide rollout, which we did. And so I think those kind of things, keeping the judgment in place, but slowly doing it. I mean, even the other day, one of my cousins was like, I'm applying to HSI and I'm not getting, they said I didn't even meet the grade 9 quals. And I'm like, immediately in my head, even I was questioning it. I'm like, was that because of the AI? Like, I've got to go back and like, let me look him up and see, and like really look to see, because he was like, I'm confident I meet the superior qual. So like, I think it's going to take time, but I think as we're showing these use cases and we're showing success stories, it's going to build confidence over time. I mean, and it's good because we should be questioning it, right?
Absolutely.
We don't want to go ahead and like make huge mistakes that, yes, that's a job, but like it could be something else in the future.
So I take two paths to this question, right? So there's human-initiated action, which is a lot of AI is today, right? You have to go to a site, you have to type in your query or add your documents and then hit enter, right? And then take that data and do something with it, right? And so like human in the loop is very much explicit in that context, right? Then there's the other path, which is AI happening, which is what Carin is talking about. So it's sort of these non-person entity type, like agentic AI, right? And as you start shifting workloads from the top one to the bottom one, the data quality requirement is shooting through the roof. The testing around that shoots through the roof. And the ability to monitor and audit not from like an IG perspective, but like from a performance perspective, right? Your point exactly. Like somebody calls you and says, "Hey, I totally met this. What the heck?" You should be able to see, "Oh yeah, your thing was totally flagged as anomalous, right?"
Right.
So let me shift that over to the human reviewer.
Hired.
Totally anomalous, right? But like there's these, there's extra things you have to consider in the development pipeline when you're starting to do this. And when you shift out of AI and hand it to a human, right? It might be that your confidence interval is below a 30% threshold or whatever it is, right? And then it shunts the case into a human-driven workflow. So for our purposes, like we're very focused on the top line right now. So we're building the product Ask Hamilton. Very much want to shrink the time to get an answer to a question on very specific Coast Guard questions. And you think about all of our policies and manuals and message traffic and all the things that hit the everyday user, and they have to be totally aware of it at all times. I'm not totally aware of everything, right? So, but if I have a question, like one of my junior officers comes in and says, "What do I do here?" And I'm like, "Well, let me look up the manual," and I pull it from my own OneDrive, and it's out of date, right? It's like, oh, I downloaded this 10 years ago, right? And so now I have to go for a hunt, right? I have to find that document. And so how about this? How about you I'll tell him, hey, just ask your question in Ask Hamilton and get the reference and read the reference that it pulls back, right? I just shortened that kill chain of that problem substantially. But that's built on Coast Guard data. Same thing with our actual mission communities, our marine inspectors, our naval engineers, our legal teams. Coast Guard does a lot of legal reviews. Can they at least find the information they're looking for really quickly? Still putting that human in the decision tree, 100%, We're doing these journey maps where we say, hey, here's the process pre-AI. Here's all the choke points, here's all the failure points, here's all the time spent doing this work. And that's a really hard thing because you got to start listening to negative stuff, right? Nobody wants to talk about the bad stuff, right? But you got to talk about the bad stuff. Then say, okay, if I put AI in here, what do I collapse in that journey map? And maybe I take a 3-day process down into a 6-hour process on the ideal side, right? And so that is what we're going to use to help sell this solution, right? And also test it and validate it. So that's human in the loop for me. And when we start moving that closer to the lower tier, I think it's much more of bring the AI to the user, right? So in the app that they're doing the work and in the case management tool or whatever they're doing, they have an AI assistant working with them along the way, right? It knows the context of their case, it knows the context of other cases, and it can help facilitate that journey through the workflow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, Carin, what you were saying resonated with me as well around an iterative approach. You know, all of the workloads that I work on as well with some of our customers, it's always iterative. It's groups learning the technology, breaking, quote unquote, failing, and then trying to figure out that way to the solution that makes the most sense and determine the right level of human involvement based on that. So kind of going back to some of the discussion that we had around data specifically, AI decision-making is only as strong as the data behind it. And we hit on this a little bit, but what have been some of the hardest challenges in ensuring data quality, timelines, and relevance across legacy systems?
I can take this one. So for the first part, so I would say it's interesting because I think a lot of the data problems we've had in the past are all still there. Culture, data silos, people sharing data and holding on to it too tight, and the quality of data and timeliness. But where I love where the shift we're going with AI is it's helping push that forward. It's showing people that we need to do that. And so yes, data is still number one over everything, but it's an important, like, AI's help propel it forward. So I would say, like, for me, it's interesting because, you know, 1 minute we were talking about the development team, and in my head I was like on a week, like, oh my gosh, we need them to be more disciplined with their data practices and better quality. And then I talked to a development team and they're like, no, it's not that at all. And you realize, like, you're kind of peeling layers of an onion. Like, you think it's a data quality issue, and then sometimes it's a business process issue where it's like, no, we don't have bad data. It's just there's no process in the pipeline to tell us that the data has changed. Like TDY, I'm dealing a lot with HR data right now, if you didn't notice. But like, if somebody goes on TDY, there's not really a mandatory requirement to make that. So it's hard to know where people are, what roles they are they capstone? And until you work and partner with the business to understand that and also educate them to tell them why it's important, and let's help peel this onion together, right? So that they understand that we can make their job faster, we can make decisions as an organization better, and then meet them where they're at. So like say, okay, you're having challenges, let me help you with the data, and get tools. Like, I will say that flat out, like, we need tools to also help us do that. And so get like quality tools so we can help them measure their quality, see how it's trending over time. If there's anomalies or we're seeing it's going down, let's work with them to identify why it's going down and to get it better. And then with that, we can help them to get their data better, in better state, implementing processes, and at the same time, we're getting more mission value for other groups that need to use it. And so I would say it's still like the culture data quality issue, and then I think tooling and having that environment. I mean, we both talked about the data architecture and the fabric and having the tools and API gateways to make the data more readily available. I know some of you in the past, like, I've always talked about the data bodega, right? And it was supposed to be that data marketplace that you can get our data products. And it was great, and it was an idea, but because it was just like a nice idea and it was something, it helped us move forward, but it didn't help us get there. And so now, and I mentioned earlier, you guys might have heard him earlier, Dustin Getz, our CIO, he's really an advocate for data and implementing our data architecture and fabric. And so with that, we're going to also mandate and put in reviews, like, we need to have these data products readily available. It's going to be in everyone's review, making sure that we have the quality, and it's not just the data, but it's in a fit to use. So it's clean, it's ready. We have the permissioning and the things around it, and like zero trust built in. So things like that I think are going to help us enable, but it's been a challenge. And it's been hard, but I think it's so hopeful for us to get there.
Yes. So last year, the Coast Guard issued the Force Design 2028 executive action plan and the summary document. I was a key writer on the technology side of that document. And so I was taking my 2 years of data fabric, data mesh, and cloud and platform experience and just sort of dumping it into that document and saying, you know, here's how I really want to see what if you were to say, new Coast Guard technology, this is what we want to ascribe to, right? We have 3 years, let's go. And there's some key action items in there regarding data and AI, right? One is to use data as a foundational asset, an operational asset for all mission threads. Use data to enhance the Coast Guard experience, my experience, right? The journey through from commissioning or from enlistment all the way through retirement and beyond, right? It's to use AI to shorten those chains, right? Be able to make the mission more engaging and exciting, all right? As a lot of what we do is pre and post mission work, right? You're writing a mission plan, you're collecting data, you're figuring out what to do, you're trying to convince someone to do something, right? These are not zero-cost missions. They're actually quite deadly, right? Search and rescue is a deadly endeavor for the rescuers and the searchers. So you have to have a good foundation with which to say, launch that helicopter or launch that aircraft, right? And then on the other side, you have a report. You have to document what happened. You have to show what you've used in terms of asset fuel or time or whatever it is, right? So what if you could put AI on both of those bookends so that it could help you shorten the time for planning and then making that decision on go, no go, which hopefully saves more lives, right, in that mission context. And then on the other side, it's recording everything you've done in that mission because we're collecting this data continuously and feeding it into a centralized system. And then the report on the other end is really just a validation, right? You're looking at it and say, yep, totally got it, right? Almost like the transcript from a Teams meeting. It's always correct. You got to look at that, right? We're not quite there yet where it's just like rubber stamp that, right? Mm-hmm. But could you say, I've just taken 6 hours off your plate and turned that into 1 hour? Now you can get back on mission that much faster, right? Or I need less people focused on a mission. I can broaden my mission space even further, right? So there's some knock-on effects to getting the data piece right and then using that in practice. And so what we focused on quite early, to Carin's point, is personal readiness and HR data. That was what our Office of Data Analytics did for a year, and thankfully they did that, right? Because we didn't know Force Design 28 was coming at that point. And so when we arrived, and readiness was a key topic area, and hiring 15,000 more Coasties in 3 years was a key topic area, training them and doing all that work. How do you even start tracking and dealing with that? How do you know what your situation is? Well, we know. We have the data products, we built it, we have the quality built in. They're actually building second order, third order products off of those, right? To really dive into the very specific aspects of that journey. And we're answering the hard questions we could never answer before because nobody put the legwork in to actually tease that information out of the source data. So it's really, really, really exciting. You know, you're starting to see the fruit bear from the tree, which is sort of makes me really happy because I'm like, I told you so, right? I told you this is what we're going to see 3 years ago, and it's coming to fruition. It's really exciting to see that.
That's awesome. That's incredibly exciting. Okay, so as chief data officers, you've seen the evolution for storing data to leveraging data to provide proactive insights and decision-making at speed and scale, a lot of what you've just addressed already. But what lessons have you learned in deploying predictive and analytics across use cases within your organization? And can you share any best practices that you've picked up along the way?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, you know, for me goes back to data, and I hit on a lot of it, but it's like going back to the data quality, having the trust and having the relationships. Like those are our best practices, is like building those relationships with the mission space, finding critical wins that you'll have in critical like operation needs, but also ones that will be successful to help you evolve. I mean, in the past, like data was, you know, it was storage, it was there to use and do reporting and dashboarding, and now it's not only like learning about the quality, but like real time, right? We need to get timeliness. So, you know, and I'm not going to say it's perfect because there's, we still live in the world of spreadsheets and people giving, here's our data, and it's in an Excel spreadsheet, and every week they're uploading it to a site, but we're really breaking through that and saying, okay, we need to get data from the source or from, the service catalog where we can get the data. Because timely data is critical for those AI decision makings. Can't be the old static data that, we used to do dashboards off of.
Yeah, so we did the 6 months of analytics bliss, I would say, right? It's wonderful. But you're taking this original product that somebody made at some point, and a lot of people trust it, right? And you actually peel that onion layer back, and you're like, maybe you shouldn't have trusted that so much, right? There's some weird stuff going on here, right? And so this one-to-one transference of what you had today to tomorrow really should not happen, right? You really shouldn't take it as your inspiration, but don't take it as your rule book, right? And so what we did is we did a use case inventory around our BI. We came up with about, I think it was about 40 use cases, and underneath those use cases were analytic products or data products that would support those use cases. And that's how we structured the work breakdown. And then we hired a bunch of contract teams to come in and augment our nascent data teams, right? So we're also, it's simultaneous to all of this happening, we're trying to build the future of what our data organization would look like, which is disparate data teams centered around communities or pillars of data ownership, right? And so we have, I think, 12 data domains, right? We're establishing data stewards and data owners, and underneath them are your actual data scientists and engineers and people that need to really do the work, and there's domain expertise required there. This is one of the problems, is that you can't hire out expertise, right? Coast Guard is pretty small. We can probably find some ex-coasties that might have some knowledge of this stuff and bring them back in, right? But the challenge is that might be aged knowledge, right? It might not be information that's prescient, right? It's right at the timeliness. So finding those domain experts and actually empowering them and tasking them, because they're probably doing something else, right? Tasking them to provide their knowledge to the people doing the work is so hard, right? That's the hardest part about this whole journey. But once you unlock that door and you do a couple of well, I'll just talk loud. So, there you go. So you do a couple of the sequences, right? You're going through the flow and you're delivering products, and then all of a sudden this excitement builds, and that's the phase we're at right now. So people are, you kind of have to lead. You have to lead out front, do the work, fight off all the people that are sort of naysaying you, then deliver the product, stand back, let the organization absorb it, right? Because it's new. Everybody hates new stuff, right? So change management is also a key here, right? So you got to get ahead of that with communication, with preparatory information, and then stand back, let the organization give you their feedback, and then attack it again, right? Again, this is a very software-centric viewpoint, right? Keep iterating that product. It's never done. I think we're on the 3rd iteration of some of our analytics right now, right? We have a feedback button on the top right. I submitted some feedback myself. I was like, I don't like this. I couldn't figure out what the heck's going on. If I can't figure it out, that guy can't figure it out, right? Being really mean about it. But that's part of this journey, right? It's to your point, it's not static, right? We need to be engaged in this activity. And there's some secondary, I think that's the analytic front, right? There's some secondary aspects to this where, okay, that's a very analytical view. Some people don't like viewing dashboards or really complicated, table diagrams. Maybe we can distill that into what maybe be like a readiness hub or some form of a presentation that's more consumable to the 99% of people who just want the information that's relevant to them in a way that they can consume it readily, and then maybe a link to the actual analytic for the people who want to dive deeper, right? So I think there's this yin and yang give and take where you're building kind of both of those experiences at the same time. So I'm very excited about that. We're continuing that journey.
And I also think another best practice is, we've kind of paused a little bit because of the influx of all the work coming in, but our data literacy program. And I still think we're starting that up again, but I still think that's key and critical to continue the journey on that, because I think just not only is it educating and teaching and even partnering if you're not the chief AI officer and data officer, but partnering with AI officer and doing AI literacy as well as a partner because I think it's so important for people to understand that not only is it teaching them and educating them on why it's important, but it gets people excited. And I always said, like, if I could do nothing else as CDO, I'm gonna like be annoyingly happy and excited about data, because I think people always saw it as like, it's just data. Like, you should have heard the comments from all my friends when I'm like, should I be the chief data officer? They're like, you're gonna be one of those boring data people. But like, it's, for me, it's everything. It's like become my passion, and it is everything, and I think it's highlighted. And so I think, for me, the data literacy program is key and important to continue to go through and to continue to do. And also, again, I know I mentioned business partner, but another example I just want to say is like there was an area of like quality. This was return to work, and we were using building data, and we realized how, not horrible, but how like all the opportunities we had to improve our facility data. And you know, it was interesting. So we did all this work and we cleaned this data and we made it better. And then like 2 months later, I'm like, wait, how did this get bad again? And then we didn't realize that there was somebody that was in the background, the business was like, hey, I can just manually update this in another system. And then I want you to come back and pull that data. And so that's how the data quality was coming back, is, you know. So it's interesting because you get to learn so much new things when you start like building those relationships and digging deeper.
I'm going to take another. I'm going to throw another lesson out there. Here we go. Because we got some time. So
yeah.
One of the problems with this goes back to transformation, right? When you're transforming, you're building things and you're killing things, right? It's just the nature of the beast. Well, guess what happens when you start killing things, right? What you relied on as a source data solution no longer is your source data solution. Or you might have merged two disparate source data solutions into one, and you have to deal with the repercussions of that, right? You have to build new workflows, new ETL pipelines. Which one is the actual authoritative source? That's the other thing that's, right, these systems, they grow, they're all over the place. And you're like, oh, I go to this system for training data. And then you ask the next guy, I go to that system for training data. And you ask the next guy, no, that's the actual training data system. Guess what? They're all correct, because they all had different views on different trainings, right? They were not unified. And so from a data aggregation standpoint, I actually needed to connect to all three of them, right? The original target was just connect to the one, because that was the authoritative system. But you actually had to connect to all three and then aggregate that information into the true training readiness data set. Thankfully, we helped collapse that a little bit. But the lesson learned here is, like, don't go into the data journey with the assumption that you know where your data is and what it looks like. It is all over the place, it's constantly moving, and you have to be on it, right? And that's when there's a transference here of that journey from what would be like the technologist side, because we're doing like the real like connection stuff. You got to transfer that to the domain owners at some point, right? The domain owners are wholly responsible for that, the answer to that question. And if they can't answer that question, find a different domain owner, because they're not doing their job. That's my opinion. And they really, really need to be in control of that situation, right? And it's the issue here is you're crossing organizational silo boundaries, right? Because what would typically be an IT concern is now all of a sudden 3 or 4 people's concern, right? You have a privacy, you have a data owner, you have the IT person, you have the infrastructure people, that's me, right? And you have to convince all these people that this is what you want to have happen. And that is, in the government, is incredibly difficult, right? So that's where the CDO comes in. A really strong CDO like Carin would come in and set those standards, right, and really enforce that, because that is how we can move this forward.
No, absolutely. I mean, data discovery is the foundational component, and then understanding what your data standards are and enforcing those is really foundational to all the incredible things that you're able to do with AI and other technologies. And even just having an understanding of the data lineage and data quality is also incredibly important, because when it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with keeping AI accountable, you know, how do we trace that back? We trace it back to the data. And where did this data come from? It came from this ETL process, from this data source, et cetera. So having that lineage is incredibly important as well. And so all of this really is, you know, may not be as interesting to some people as all the fun AI stuff we like to talk about, but it is foundational and critical to making this stuff operational and actually useful. So it makes a lot of sense. So that's a big focus area. Okay, so when it comes to workforce and culture, what cultural or workforce shifts are required for leaders and operators to trust AI-assisted decisions without abdicating responsibility? Which we touched on a little bit, but it would be nice to get a deeper perspective on what you all are thinking about this as well.
Yeah, I think for culture changes, you know, again, with the literacy and things like that, you're helping change that and being excited, showing those use cases as success stories, and then teaching the boundaries and what's good for, what's not, and just enforcing, like, we're not changing the decision. It's not a replacement. It is an ally. AI is an ally to all of us and to make our jobs easier. And I think also, like, leadership, leading by example, being accountable for the decisions that are made and holding that accountability, but then also showing the use and using AI for their own decision making and then owning that decision. A lot of it's, we've already touched on the culture, but you know, that's the key ones for me.
Yep. So as you can tell, I'm pretty enthusiastic about this stuff. So that's part of the culture, right? Bring the enthusiasm to the table. The bodega analogy is culture, right? You're building this momentum, right? Nothing's going to happen if people don't believe that you can get it done, right? And you build trust in that by not only leading the way, like you're building space, like you're building safe space there for other people to follow in for you, but you're also showing them competence and decision making, and that's something that is really important in this journey, because it can go sideways 500 different ways during this journey, and if you don't have a really strong focus on those basic requirements of just enthusiasm and grit and focus on the mission, it probably won't ever come to fruition, right? There's just too many ways it can kind of peel off and become just a black hole type circus, right? So I'm really excited because we've had such a great lineage of leaders helping with this journey with enthusiasm and with focus and drive. And I think that's why we are where we are today, right? It takes more than just the IT people to do this work, right?
And I think also the culture, like, you know, it's been a struggle for me, and I've said this to my leadership, of not having a seat at the table as being CDO, right? And not being able to constantly talk about data. And I think having a leader who believes in data and the importance of it in governance as much as you do, so they can help bring your story to the table or bring you to the table and enforce that through the agency, I think that is also key to having culture. It's that executive buy-in and support all the way to the top. So it's got to start at the top. Otherwise, you will never be successful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So looking 3 to 5 years ahead, what would success look like for AI-enabled decision-making in the government?
So for me, success is, speaking of those two lanes, right? Going from explicit AI to implicit AI, yep. Right? And trust is the normative factor on that. And so I think in the next 3 years, we really need to focus on building that trust factor, right? And when you're seeing it, the AI agent doing its thing, the thought that comes to your mind should be, it's going to produce something awesome. Can't wait for that to happen, right? Not, I don't want to review that thing. It's probably going to take a couple cycles, right? So I think we really need to build that trust factor, and a lot of that is trial and error. A lot of that is quality data, right? Because the AI is only as good as the data that you give it. And then I think the other thing I want to see in 3 years is this complete integration of the mission fabric, right? So something on top of just the data fabric, but there's all this operational data, and a lot of that data gets thrown on the floor, right? We don't end up using it, or it gets turned into like slick notes or some sort of free text stuff. So how can we capture all of that information and really derive a lot of insights and real-time synthesis of that information? You know, there's a future where we're viewing the Coast Guard battle space, if you will, right? All the cutters and aircraft that are out there in the world, and what are they doing at any given moment, right? I don't think nobody can really answer that question very well. Like, you have to be on the cutter to really understand, or you have to be on the aircraft. So if you can say, like, what is the Coast Guard doing today at any given moment, and you'd be able to answer that with fidelity, that would be really awesome, right? That's a true common operating picture, a true operational space management. So I think in 3 to 5 years, as you start collecting all of those operational threads, you have great connectivity, you have storage, you have processing, you have all these things lining up with each other. You can start doing things like that at the aggregate and scale level, which changes how you do operations, right? That's fundamental change, that's transformative change in how you do operations. So I'm really excited about that journey.
And for me, for 3 to 5, I'm also going to focus on the data, like having that. We don't have this data architecture yet in place. It hasn't been funded. I'm a team of 2 data people. So for success for me is really in 3 years is having that infrastructure and architecture, not only for us, but for the whole entire agency and also federal government. Because as you were mentioning that mission data today, how it's kind of put on the side, we're actually now at the point of needing mission data from all of the components and agencies to be able to do our job, not only them, but state and local and everybody else. And so, you know, in 3 to 5 years, success would look like that we have the platform, we have the technology, we have the data products, we have the AI, and everything's in place for us to be able to function interoperatively with each other seamlessly. We have processes in place to share and document that is very easy and streamlined, doesn't take 6 months to approve, and things in place. That's where, for me, success would look like for me. And the data bodega would be like full of all kinds of data products.
Full stock
Full
bodega.
shelves. Full shelves.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're seeing in the industry as well, as a big push toward, you know, multimodal analysis, looking at video feeds, looking at situational awareness around a particular satellite imagery or what have you, moving into that multimodal component, as well, of course, as the push for agentic AI and being more proactive. And that's really what we're seeing a lot of interest in as well with some of the customers that we work with around, hey, I want to move from, you know, my user dictating what's happening to your point, to more the agent going out and doing things for me, and then having me kind of sign off and hit that checkbox, yes, this looks good type of action. So,
and we would have the focus on where they need to be, right? Like human and focusing on those areas, and AI doing the other areas that they don't need to, and really building that trust. So trusting it and having AI as an ally. And I think in 3 years, I know we can get there with confidence in AI. I'm confident we'll get there.
I love it.
Even me.
I'm with you, Corinne.
Yeah, we'll be there. We will be there.
So I think we're able to take a few questions from the audience, and yeah, so I think there's some mics coming around, but got their hand up in the middle here.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Commander White, this one's for you. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciated your focus on governance and data sharing. And I'm curious if the Coast Guard is thinking about a future where models trained on Coast Guard sensor data could be reused or adapted by joint partners as part of a broader reciprocal maritime domain awareness ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it goes both ways too, right? So the Coast Guard absolutely wants to use joint partner technology, right? You know, we're a heavy user of Navy technology. I've done that through my career. So how do you integrate something that may have been built for a different purpose into the Coast Guard mission set? So the problem with training models is sometimes they get really brittle, right? So they're very sensitive to where the sensor might be located, what the context of that is, the sensor fidelity itself. And so I think sharing that might be a little challenging, because you don't want to take a model and then put it in the wrong context and then it's no longer valid. And I think the way we train AI right now lends itself towards being pretty brittle in the trained model sense. So I'd want to see a little more action in the research realm to make AI a little less brittle in that sense. I think generative AI makes it a little bit better, especially for object detection and scene description and things like that. But you know, true, like, hey, put a box around this thing and you know, figure out what it's doing and all that stuff. Like, I like to see that as a delivered package, right? So when you go out and buy a commercial off-the-shelf product, which may be boutique to the particular defense or security mission that you're in, it should work. It should just work, right? They should have already thought about all those contexts. So I think for me, it's more about validation of that. So if another mission partner has deployed these sensors and they're working really well, we should be buying more of those things, right? And we should be we should also be diversifying the spectrum with which we are sensing as well, right? It's not just visual, right? There's radio spectrum, there's space, there's indirect sensors, maybe data feeds coming in from commercial entities that are that we can buy that data from. So I think there's a broader answer there beyond maybe just boutique training of models. But I agree with you. We should be sharing at least our experiences, but also if we can share the models themselves and be able to deploy them in context, that'd be great.
Any other questions? We got one in the back here.
Thank you all so much. You both mentioned that some of the challenges around facilitating gridding data sharing and enabling both the technical sharing across organizational and technical boundaries, but also ensuring that you had awareness of data quality across those different systems. Could you break down some of those challenges a little bit more? Are there challenges with ensuring that procured systems have the right capabilities? Is it ensuring internal engineering capability to do those things? Or, are there other bureaucratic hurdles that are preventing some of that? Thank you.
I think it's all of the above. From what I've seen, and a lot of it is, again, like I mentioned, peeling the onion to identify why those problems exist. I mean, we've seen things where development teams allowed a free-form field for state. We have 50 of them, maybe 51. So we saw Virginia in the database spelled wrong. So those are examples, and we know the tools and the products have that capability. But then there's also been things like with new tools and not having them having the ability to do certain things that we want to do or customize it for things that we need. Sometimes we do need to think out of the box, right? And then those cause tooling issues. So I think for us, it's all of the above. I think for us trying to get ahead of that is to get the data quality tools to be helping us to monitor that, put those place, put the standards, put the requirements in place, and then try to help monitor that so we can be proactive to make it better. And then normalize it right before we do the data products, not necessarily do we have to fix it everywhere? It's going to be really hard on some of the legacy systems to make that improvement. But at least if we understand what it is when it's coming into the place when we're setting up the data products, that they could have better quality for use.
Yeah, I think I look at it from the technical side mainly. It's just getting the data to the right place with security is sometimes difficult, right? We operate on DOW networks and not DHS networks. So in itself is a barrier, right? Now we have means to do that, but it's just extra steps in order to move the data from where it resides and where it's controlled to a different control point. And I think we went down this journey recently where the component said, hey, we want this data set. We really want this data set. Just give it to us. And the first question that came out of my mouth was, what do you want to do with it? And it wasn't because I didn't want to give it to them. Right? It was I want you to understand, what is the purpose of giving you the data? And I think what we need to really get good at is answering those questions, and so that we can give you the right information with even the right standards, like meters, feet, centimeters, whatever. All these little things that people are like, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine. No, but when you actually put it in the actual model, or you actually put it in the app, it's not fine, because if you didn't do the transform, the quintessential example is the Mars lander that just crashed right into Mars because they went from they didn't do meters to feet, right? Wow. Or meters to yards, right? So it was off by just a smidge, but that smidge caused the loss of the aircraft. So I think we need to be very, very careful about when we say sharing, it's way more than just an agreement, right? It's absolutely all the way down to the schema and the data itself.
Hi, thank you so much. I guess kind of to that point, when it comes to looking at data sharing, when it comes to, and circling back to kind of the multimodal types of context building and situational awareness building, that happens in kind of different parts of DHS, and just broadly understanding on the NatSec front, where do you see kind of the priority being in that using multimodal types of data? Is it building those kinds of tools in-house, so looking at geospatial awareness and building talent within the government? Or is it looking more at lateral sharing? Are there priorities in that domain to bring in more multimodal types of data?
I'm not really into that space particularly.
Yeah, I would say, again, I don't want to say all the above for everything. I think there's definitely a use of getting data and also the expertise from industry, right, and out there. Internally, there's things like you mentioned that you're going to have the expertise that others won't because of the nature of the job, right? And so I think that comes to play, but I think also just looking at, getting it from, if the data is available one way or the other, they're going to try to figure out every method to get it if it's needed, right? And so I think it's just a mix of those, all of them brought together. But I mean, to your point, I'm not as familiar, especially on the geospatial side.
Yeah.
You're more water. If Air Force was,
Yeah, I kind of just go back to, what are you using the information for? Are you extracting insight? So if you have an image, what insight are you extracting from that image, right? Besides looking at it, are you looking for particular objects? Are you looking for scenery? Are you looking for contraband? Whatever the case may be, right? And so depending on what that answer to that question is, you're going to have to do a different model for that, right? You'll have to ask different questions. So I think it goes back to like, what are you going to do with this information? And then the format kind of blends into the background, because that's really an interface standard, right? There's an image or audio or video. It's really just interfacing. And what I'm actually going to extract from the signal from that image is the important piece.
And I think we probably have time for one more over here.
Thanks very much. I'm Jeff Arnold, CIO at ERT, an Earth Science and Space Technology data and modeling company in Tysons. Thanks very much for a terrific, really engaging and informative panel. Oh. Does the altitude help? Thanks very much for a great panel. And I was particularly excited because we got not only descriptions of use cases, but of actual running implementations. And Carin said something super interesting at the beginning, and that was that she's got proof by looking at better decisions that come out of the end of it. And given what we heard in the procurement panel this morning, about the move from static statements of work, RFPs, to actual outcome-determined descriptors for contracts, can you say some more, either of you, both of you, say some more about how you measure that improvement in the decisions themselves? It can be really tricky to do it. Do you do it with some data withholding experiments? Do you do A/B testing across the decision itself? Can you actually do it in a way that you could put up with a bad decision if it came out, kind of a thing? Because I can think of lots of problems in trying to look at how you measure whether the decision itself was improved.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's very interesting, because I've never thought of it in that way before, because I unfortunately wasn't here this morning, but from a contracting perspective. But it would be nice to see that shift of like demonstrated results. And of course, it all leads to mission value, right? With everything we're doing with AI, how is it impacting the mission? Are we reducing time? Are we doing more improvements? Are we doing faster decision making? So for me, I mean, listening to it from procurement and how that would happen and the demonstrated would be hard for me to think of on the fly, but I definitely think that's a great concept to look at and think about.
What I was thinking about when you asked this question is, do we do experimentation in the government? It's a serious question, right? I think, like, typically we go through a planning process and we say, that's it, deploy it, right? Make it so, and we kind of accept whatever comes out of the other side of that, which probably speaks to this static RFP problem, right? And maybe we need to shift left a bit on our thinking of, even on business process and decision making, right? How can we A/B test this or blue-green test these options? Do we have enough scale in order to do that testing, right? Do we meet the P threshold, right? The NP threshold, and that's usually a challenge in government because our scale is very, very tiny in comparison to worldwide type population dynamics, right? And doing those things. So I'm kind of torn on the answer, right? I'm like, hey, maybe we just step on the gas and go, and then know when to bail or know when to pivot, right? Instead of maybe doing a more academic journey. Maybe we need to build some more maturity in the data plane first before we can do the academic rigor necessary to truly understand what is better, what is worse, right?
And I also think, like, just going back to the contract, I know we've done before in the past, like contracting where there's a phase one is a proof of concept or pilot. And it's like, hey, if that is successful, then we're gonna move on. And if you can't show that measurable impact and to the mission, then it's a cut deal, we close it shop, we go the next. So I'm sure there's ways, because I know we've done contracting before where it's like the phase one is like a pilot or a prototype. So
Yeah,
I'd say that would also be.
I think it does start with, to your point, Carin, like the mission objective Like,
Yeah.
what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve? Because we're not just trying to like do stuff with AI for its own sake. And then it gets into, okay, well, what are the approaches to solve the problem, and which of those approaches is the best? And that's really where we're talking about our POC phase, our iteration. And then once you determine, okay, based on all of these tests, based on our scope and our success criteria, what is the best option? That's where we start thinking about, okay, now how do I incorporate that into an application if it's going into an existing application, or how do I deploy a new application? And to me, at that point is where we start going into the DevSecOps process and start thinking about canary, blue-green, A/B testing, and kind of implementing that to a base of users to see if it actually does work in production, or if you do need to make a shift if that POC testing wasn't enough, and then maybe you do come back to that point and continue to iterate. So that's how I've experienced it and looked at it from the perspective of those that I've worked with, but would love to understand if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, and I know we only have a minute left, but like, I also think it's for AI, it might be to do something like that later down the line, because I think we're still learning and we're still prototyping, and we wouldn't want to punish a vendor or an industry from like, hey, it didn't work because, you know, we didn't have it on place on the government. And so, you know, that specific use case, we had a team that their goal was AI, and so that was just the function, the scope. So we were, to your point, it was failure, it did, like, there was tweaks we had to do that it was failure up front. We had to modify and change it to get to success, and I think as we're growing and in this, you know, new place, I think that's the right approach, and I think in the future, after we get the confidence, we get our governance for AI, we get everything in place, moving to more of a model of like, hey, demonstrate this success would make sense.
All of that works great in the pipeline, and it's because all of y'all have come out of the data side. But I thought what I heard you say was that the decisions are getting better. And so,
oh yeah, they are.
How do we set standards, and how do we do the evaluation on the decision to demonstrate that the investment in the AI pipeline is improving the actual decision?
I got what you're saying. So yeah, and so we've seen how much faster we've been able to make decisions and how they have more insight because AI is highlighting the anomalies and the differences. But I don't know if, and I'll have to check on this, if they went back and like reran some of those decisions in the past they made to see if like decision making got better. But that's a good point. So maybe I will bring that back and test them on it. But thank you.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate the time. I think we are at our time for today.
Thank you all.